Hey guys, if you're a teaching pro, you're in for such a treat with this episode with Ed Shanaphy. We talked about some really important topics, and I'm telling you, this conversation is so good, you may just need pen and paper. I knew it would be good because I know Ed well, and I knew that I could count on him to tackle some questions that are definitely not easy to answer, especially on the fly. I asked him the $1,000,000 question: should a pro be an independent contractor or a staff? We talked about the rise in search firms in our industry. Should clubs be using search firms? And the qualities in candidates for director role searches. I am telling you, this is a golden episode. Ed does not shy away from sharing his knowledge with us. This is firsthand and valuable information that you get to listen here for free. Okay, just before I let you go, remember, add me on Instagram, on Facebook, send me an email, avitatennispodcast@gmail.com if you want to reach out to me. Okay? Without any further ado, here's my convo with Ed. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Vita Tennis, the podcast for those of us who eat, sleep, breathe tennis. My name is Jennifer Gelhaus, and I'm your host. Today, I'm talking to Ed Shanaphy. Ed is a force in the tennis industry. He is a club management consultant, tennis director, and podcast host of a show called Beyond the Baselines. Ed is currently the director of operations for the Boulevard Club in Vero Beach, Florida, and the director of tennis at the Sippican Club in Marion, Massachusetts. He has been the head pro at Orchid Island Golf and Beach Club, at the Jupiter Island Club, Edgartown Yacht Club, Quail Valley Golf Club, and the Ocean Troller Racquet Club. Ed actually started his career out in the marketing world in England for 17 years before pursuing a path in the tennis industry. He graduated from Duke University, and he's originally from New York. Welcome, Ed, to Vita Tennis. Did I get all of that right?
You did. Great job. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. You have such a crazy background. I can't believe that you were in marketing for that long. I knew you had a marketing background, but I didn't realize you did that for that long before pursuing tennis as a career. So how did you end up getting into tennis? What kind of caused you to make that career change?
Part of it was moving back to America. So I graduated from Duke, went to work in New York for a year, and got into grad school over in London. So I went over there for a year and a half, 2-year program, and I didn't want to leave. And so I started a business. That was back in the day, you could do that. And I started a business and got my, what is equivalent to a green card over time over there. It's called indefinite leave. And it was actually marketing. It started out as a record company, music. And we were one of the top 10 record companies in Europe. And it was based on direct marketing, direct sales. So I would go out, at the beginning and license a record like Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin. We based it on nostalgia, and then I'd market it. And we competed with like Reader's Digest, Time Life, and I did that for 19 years and loved every minute of it. But I wanted to come home. I wanted to be. I had offices in Australia at the time. But by the time I finished, Ireland, London. And I just, I missed the United States. So I came home, and at that time I was married with no kids. So I brought my British wife home with me. And she said, "What are you going to do, Ed?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if I want to go back into advertising. Maybe I'll go back to teaching tennis." And I had taught tennis all through my college career. Taught at Greenwich Country Club, worked for Gary Squires there, and worked in Ridgefield, Connecticut for Gary too. And then just continued through my years in London, playing and teaching a little bit just on the side, but playing a lot. So I wasn't, the racket was still in my hand all those years. And I came back, and fortunately, one of my mentors here, Jim Buck, hurt himself at one of the local clubs, and he knew I could teach. He called me up. He said, "Hey, Ed, can you go fill in for this camp I'm teaching at Quail Valley?" And I said, "Sure." So I went out and took on a teaching role. And like 3 weeks later, Sam Garcia, Quail, called me and said, "Hey, Ed, you want a full-time job?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't have anything going. So yeah, I'll take it." And that's how I got back into tennis. I was very lucky. So it was nice to start again. And that was 2008. So, 15 years ago now.
Wow, that's a huge change. What do you think has been the main skill that helped you succeed in tennis? You have worked at some of the best clubs in the country, and you didn't do that for many years before that. So what do you think was the key to your success in that?
Yeah, I started late, so I was fighting, age. When I started teaching here again, I was 40, just turning 40. So, and having a baby, because we had a baby just when we got back. I guess the stress of London life dissipated, and I was able to have a little Olivia, who's now taller than I am. But I think perseverance, I think, is the number one characteristic. I would say once I got that job at Quail, persevering through a learning curve, member hospitality, and persevering with, we get along great now. My boss at the time, he taught me a lot. And sometimes, having been a boss myself, I wasn't always akin to listening to my boss. So that took a steep learning curve. I had run a, international conglomerate of advertising and music. And here I am, listening to a director of tennis who really knew the business better than I did, but it took me a while to realize that. And then I think perseverance in looking on the job market, networking, persevering through that and finding contacts, or actually just making contacts. I mean, you talk about the great clubs. Every club is great. Some are, better jobs than others, of course. And the Edgartown job, I had been to Edgartown once before. I had sailed there. And the job, Paul Patilli there, who's the director at the time, and is one of my mentors, called me. I didn't know him at all. And he said, "Hey, Ed, you got the job." I said, "What job?" I didn't apply for a job. He said, "Edgartown Yacht Club." He's like, "You know it." I was like, I've been there once. What's the job going? He said, "Head pro." I said, "When did I apply?" He said, "You didn't. I just made 2 phone calls. They both said your name and you got the job." So it was networking and
Wow.
persevering through those times of strife and trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned member hospitality. I think that's also key to succeeding as a tennis director, especially at these really nice clubs. Can you talk a little bit about your beliefs on member hospitality? What's that all about? How have you developed that part of your profession? Mhm.
Well, sure. I think part of it goes back to my running an advertising business. We had clients at the time I left. The company was called Haysbridge when we sold it. But I think, when you have clients and you're client facing, you have to think about that in terms of members. You're member facing. They actually, at most of these clubs you work at, it's member owned clubs. They're stakeholders. They're your client. They're not your equal. You work for them. And I found that very easy to move into when I got into the member hospitality side. I think we tend to forget that every time we talk to a member, they're expecting, immediate answers or immediate communications back, a reliable answer, and a knowledgeable answer if there's a question. If it's just a sign up or if it's just a menial task, that should be done immediately. And sometimes we forget to do that. And we have to think about that every day. I think I'm lucky. I grew up at a country club, and a lot of people don't have that luxury. So I saw it growing up from the membership side, and I'm still a member of several clubs. And I've been a president of a tennis club over in London. So I see it from the member side and the board side too. And it's funny, the club in London that I was the president of just called me. They know I do this consulting business, and I'm actually working with them. And it's really fun to be consulting with the board after having been a president there, I think 20 years ago. But again, they're looking at me to help them with the membership hospitality side of their new hire. When they get that hire in place, they're going through a transition with the director of tennis there. They call it head coach.
Yeah.
Different terminology. Head coach might not be the right word for that. Maybe make something different in England and say, a director of tennis or director of rackets rather than head coach, which I think puts more of the onus on coaching, which sometimes I think is a mistake in our profession.
Yes, absolutely. And I like that you mentioned responsiveness, because I think that is so undervalued, actually. To me, I value it almost more than anything. To me, hearing back from someone when you ask them something with any business is so important. And I think in the tennis world, I've been part of tournaments where like the tournament director doesn't even communicate, doesn't send you a draw when they're supposed to send you a draw, or there's just like such a lack of communication. And I think that's such such an important part of just doing a good job at what we do is communicating to members consistently and being responsive. If they have a question, trying to get back with them as soon as possible. I really think the window is perhaps 24 hours. Like
Maximum.
I think you have to get back right away. If you're waiting a week or maybe even 3 days to get back to somebody, I think that's incredibly disrespectful. Would you agree with that? I mean,
Oh, totally. I actually, this morning I got up early because I took Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off, and I had two emails from my summer club members. And summer clubs are different. We're in the middle of April now. I'm setting up. I'm not there, but I felt guilty. They emailed me on Thursday morning, and I apologized profusely, saying, "Hey, I am so sorry. I was away. I didn't check my emails. I rarely do that. I just needed some time. It's been a heck of a winter here, and I'm getting geared up for the big summer, and I needed a weekend with my family, so I just didn't even open up the laptop." But yes, I think 24 hours is your maximum amount of time. The other thing that is tougher for us, I don't think, I'm speaking kind of as an elder statesman. I'm not there yet, but I'm older than you are. But I think for us, it was easier because it was just the phone, and we're akin at my age to pick up the phone. And as I say in our business, there's nothing better than a phone call, no matter what the age of the member is. But I think the newer pros coming on board now, they rely almost too much on texting and too much on emails. You need that personal touch, like a podcast here. This is why podcasts do so well. People want to hear that voice.
yeah.
I think a phone call, the power of it is still big, just like a handwritten letter. Really huge power to that. And if I'm trying to get people out for a tournament, or if I'm trying to communicate with them about a certain fact or an issue, I tend to pick up the phone more than an email. And I think sometimes our younger pros who are geared to social media and geared to DMs and texting forget that.
Yeah, I think there's a level of even just, is that a word? Uncomfortability of younger pros. And I include myself in that because sometimes I don't like to talk on the phone, especially if you have a lot of people that you need to talk to. It's a lot easier to send an email. What I always say, and this is more of a personal preference for me, is I don't like text message at all because I so easily forget to get back with people, and I'm not very organized with my text messages. I'm getting messages from family, from friends, and then it gets all mixed in with work. To me, it's just a disaster. I always ask, just please email me. That's the best way for me to get back with you, sooner than later. But you are right that, a phone call is super important. But sometimes it's hard to get a hold of somebody, if they're working or something, then you're playing phone tag, leaving voice messages. I think for me, like, I really just like email.
Email's great. I think there are certain times where it's important to make the email or distinction with a phone call or a text. I would say that I started this up at Sippican, and I love it, is I started a Google Voice text number, and it's separate from my personal phone. It doesn't cost you anything, but all my work texts go there. And it's almost like an email and text, and I can group text people. So I really like that because it keeps it off my personal phone. As you say, you get your personal text, right? And you have your business text all in one line. It's like, oh my God, I can't keep up with it. And you're deleting and trying to keep up with those you haven't reached out to back to. So I kind of push people to a work text, which and then actually what's great about that is if I'm not in the office at Sippican, an assistant can look at my computer and find those texts and answer.
So is that connected to your personal phone number, or is that separate?
You get a new phone number. So you attach it to your cell, right? But it's a different line so that I have it as a 508 number, and I use it for my whole business, all my consulting. So all my work texts are in one spot. So the office can see it. I can go back. The history stays there. If I upgrade a phone, I don't have to worry. The work texts are still there. So it really does help me organize, as you said, organize texts.
Yeah, to me, that's the biggest challenge. And group conversations is like, forget it. I'm not even participating. I might read the last one whenever I get to open it, but I am not going back to read the whole conversation. Like, don't even include me. I always tell people, do not include me in group text because I do not like it.
I get you.
Yeah. But you're definitely a business guy. And I think your background really has helped you when it comes to being in the tennis industry. I think that your background, I think maybe even helps you separate yourself from other pros that might not have more marketing and business side to them. So I definitely want to take advantage of the opportunity and talk to you a little bit about business. Let's get down to
Love it. Let's get down to boots and business.
Yes. So one of the main questions that I always get for myself and from others is, should a tennis pro, and I know you've written articles about this, so you're the perfect person to ask this question too, is should a tennis pro be an independent contractor or should they be a staff? What's the final verdict on this one?
depends on the job, the club, and the pro. Okay, so every situation is different. So let's take it from the pro side first. Okay, so if you're a pro, if you're an independent contractor, you have to actually have other work. You can't just be an independent contractor for one person forever in longevity. The IRS is going to say no way, and that's what they're trying to avoid, is you being an independent contractor and where you should really be an employee. So we all have to remember that's the key, is you have to, as a contractor, have several employees, several employers. You have to carry your own liability insurance. You have to carry your own workers' comp. We all forget that. And you have to be able to show a loss. So most of our jobs in our industry, you probably don't show a loss unless it rains or if a hurricane takes out your club, then you could show a loss. But if you're an independent contractor, you have to assume all the costs of doing business. You have to have your own tools of the trade, like a carpenter. If he shows up, he's an independent contractor. He brings his own hammer. He brings his own nails. If you're an independent contractor and using the club's tennis balls and their cages, you're not an independent contractor probably. So you have to bring your own tools. You have to bring your own liability. There are a lot of costs associated with it. But on the flip side, you can make more money because you can actually work for multiple clubs, or you should be working for multiple clubs, and you can do multiple jobs. So, you could actually be a tennis pro and drive Uber on the side and be independent contractor for both, right? So you can also, as an independent contractor, running your own business, deduct all those business costs against your profit. Now, technically, you're supposed to be able to show a loss. Hopefully, you don't, but you could if something went completely wrong. From the club standpoint, it depends on how much control of the employee or the contractor they want. As a business person, if I were the president of a club, I don't want an independent contractor. They can show up when they want. We can't set their schedule. You're not allowed to set schedules for a contractor. You're not allowed to tell them how to work or how to teach or how to talk to a member. That's all outside of the control of an employment contract when they're a contractor. So as a club side, you probably want that director of tennis as an employee, so you can tell them when their hours are, when they can teach, what they have to do. If you want some freedom as a tennis pro, you probably want to be a contractor. Every club and every situation is different, and it can be different based on the pro. Some pros don't want the hassle or the uncertainty of not getting a regular employee stipend, a salary check. So it depends on the person as well that's involved.
So would you say for a seasonal club, like the ones that we go to in the summer, you're going there specifically for that job, mm-hmm. right? And I would think that does that mean that you're automatically considered a staff and not an independent contractor?
No, because it depends on what you do up there and how you run that business. If the club doesn't get involved with your business, do they get involved in your hiring? If not, no, you're probably a contractor. If you don't have if you can set your own prices, you're a contractor. There's a 20-point rule that you have to 20 rules that you have to follow to technically be a contractor. As I said, bringing your own materials, bring your own tools, covering your own liability, covering those subcontractors' liabilities. For example, I cover all my subcontractors in terms of workers' comp if they don't have it. So that's a liability to me and a cost to me. My board doesn't get involved in my hiring. My board doesn't get involved in my pricing. My board doesn't get involved in my marketing. I run the software. But if you're using club software, now you're using club tools. So there's a very sticky few points in there that, you have to make sure that you are correct in your understanding of what it is to be a contractor. The less control of the employee probably means that person could be a contractor. And if you're not controlled by the board, then you could most likely be a contractor. But once the board starts setting your pricing or setting your schedule or when you're going to open your tennis shop, it's going to be difficult to say you're a contractor.
Gotcha. That's really interesting because I've worked for many different places, and sometimes I've been a contractor, sometimes I'm considered staff. And it's so difficult to really know what's the best situation. I mean, there are tax benefits and financial benefits to both the club and the pro to be an independent contractor.
Correct.
But I guess it just depends on how the business itself is conducted and how much control the club has over you. If they want you there available at certain times, then you're more of a staff, and that makes a lot of sense to me.
There's so many intricacies here. For example, housing. Like, we bring that up all the time. Housing, if the club houses you, you're probably an employee. If you're paying for your housing and you're on the lease, you're probably a contractor. So, to be safe, to be a contractor, you've got to go find your house. You've got to go get the lease. And then you're probably going to have employees of yours who are getting housed. And there's a lot of intricacies. It depends on, I'm a business person, as you said, and I much prefer to run my own business. I want my own employees. I want my own contractors. I don't want anyone to tell me who I can or cannot hire. I want to run the business. And if the club doesn't like it the way I'm running it, then they say, that's the end of the contract. First thing with the seasonal club too is you have a finite date. You're May 15th to September 15th. It does help if you're working for others or earning money from others at the same time, because that will help you also stay as an independent contractor. I think clubs are tending to go the employee route now just to safeguard their own taxable liabilities. But again, those costs are higher for the clubs. You have to remember that's why they tried to keep us all as contractors for as long as they could, because once you're an employee, they got to pay withholding tax on you. They've got to pay your workers' comp. They've got to pay a lot more in terms of you as an employee.
Mm-hmm. And to those independent contractors, say a pro that has their own program at a park or at an HOA or something like that, I think it is really important to know. And I always heard of it, but I never really thought of it or did it until recently, actually, is to create an LLC, right? For more protection, I guess, for your business, right?
Correct. LLC or an Inc. S Corp through your own personal, which goes through your personal tax return. But yes, it protects you in terms of liability, lawsuits, acts of negligence. God forbid that would happen. But remember, every time you walk on the court, something can happen. Someone can hurt themselves. Other untoward things may be accused or alleged. And so you need to protect yourself and your subcontractors and your employees. So having a business such as an LLC would help you in that situation. Separates you from the business, you as the person.
Yeah. It's so interesting because as tennis pros, we don't necessarily have this knowledge, at least when we first walk on the court as a teaching pro. Definitely not me. I have a science background. So I had no idea about any of this when I first started teaching. So
what I would say to anybody out there is get legal advice. The first thing you should do is get legal advice. Don't sign that independent contractor contract or that, employee is a little different, but because you're an employee, you're safe. But if you're going an independent contractor route, definitely get some legal advice. And every situation is different. So give that situation, those details to your counsel and see what comes back.
Yeah. There's just also a lot of times there's such a level of informality in our business. A lot of things are spoken and not really follow through with an actual contract and job description and like all those things. Right. So I think that we can all do better in the industry in making it more professional and having that available to all your staff so that everybody knows just what's expected of them, what their pay structure is going to be, and all those things that we don't come in knowing of. And I think, being part of the USPTA, especially when I started as a tennis pro, is what really kind of taught me about these things. But yeah, like I said, that's just not something that comes naturally to me. So I'm very thankful that, now we can have podcasts and things like this where
we can talk about it.
Yeah, somebody that's younger can listen to this and really take this in, because it is so important.
I am seeing in the industry too, from your side, you're talking from the pro side. But if you look at the small seasonal clubs too, and even the bigger ones are always, on top of this, but even the small seasonal clubs are buttoning up their liability, their job descriptions, their employee or contractor contracts. And I think that's part of the industry moving forward. I hope that's why I started my business, is every time I went to an interview, I realized that the board or the search committee had no idea what a director of tennis was required to do, what the pay structure might be, how the compensation percentages work. Every club was different. And I started the business thinking, look, I should start to educate these guys in running a business, because members don't think of you as a seasonal pro, as an employee. They think of you as Jen Gelhaus. She's awesome. She's great on court. She's fantastic teaching. She's got some nice stuff in the shop. But you're an employee, or you're in a contractor, or what's your pay structure? How are you going to do that shop? What's the percentage going to be? Are you paying their credit card commission, or are you going to have to pay that commission?
Right.
Those are all questions between an employee and a contractor that have to come out before you start the job. Right.
It's such a, like I said, there's just such a level of informality sometimes, depending on the club, right? A well-established club has the resources, have, an HR person, a general manager, all those things that have a much better idea of what's going on. But I've been to some clubs, even some clubs that are like big, nice clubs, that the tennis is great, but like the business side, when you start really looking into the organizational and operation side of it, it's kind of a disaster.
Yeah, and that's what I say. It is, if I'm not running a good business, if I'm the contractor and I'm not running a good business and it's a disaster, club should get rid of me. And I don't think, sometimes the club just puts that director of golf, if they're a contractor, or the director of tennis, off to the side and says, "Hey, go run your ship," and they don't realize how bad the ship is. And mutiny on the bounty is kind of tough when it's a seasonal and your assistants are only there for 4 months. Not going to get anywhere in 4 months, but your ship's got to be tight, and you've got to have a good legal situation, whether it be you're an employee or a contractor.
What you said is so true also, that when we're teaching, people view us as like this fun person that I'm just having a blast with on the court, not necessarily a business person. And this is,
right.
People sometimes forget that this is our livelihood. This is what we do. We love it and we're very grateful for it, but this is how we make our money.
Yeah. Right.
So, and another point that I wanted to make was that a lot of times you have a really good pro and they're excellent on court, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the person that's best suited for the administrative, organizational operations side of the club. And what ends up happening is, at a lot of clubs, that you get a pro that's very successful, that has a huge following, and then they, get quote unquote promoted, right, to, okay, now you're going to be the director. And you're taking away your best teacher, your best pro, and you're now putting them in a situation where they're doing something that, yeah, great, they're going to make more money and they get all these other benefits, but they may not be the best person for that job. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you have seen?
Sure. And I'm going to start this by saying that a lot of times I call them a court person. Okay. Somebody that's in the cage all the time, doesn't have the background or a mentor that helps them progress into that position. So that might be part of the issue with our industry, but also I think it's a part of a tennis player or a person that's on the court teaching. I just wrote a piece about this, and it goes like this. It says that it's always about them on the court. You're the center of attention when you run a clinic, really, as a teacher.
Mhm.
When you're playing on tour, you're playing in college, you're the center of attention. But then when you get to a club, it's not about you. It's about the members. And it's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of pros, whether they're teaching pros or playing pros. And so when you get to that director's role, it has nothing to do with you on the court. It's how you present yourself to your clients on a daily basis. You're in service. We're in hospitality. This is not a sport. This is a club service job. And once you become a director, really, number one thing I'm looking for is communication. When I'm hiring a director, doing a search, communication and the power to, or the adaptability to listen. Because when you're teaching, you're not listening, you're talking. But when you're a director, 95% of the time, you're listening to a member. And it's very difficult to be good at both those. I mean, very difficult. So the ability to listen and the power and ability to communicate with the members is much more important than, is much more, I'd say, difficult than teaching them how to hold a continental grip. So it's something you have to teach or be taught to understand before you get to that director's role. And a lot of times a head pro, as you said, is out there teaching 10 hours a day. They don't see the back end.
Right.
And that's what I call it, the back end. I wrote on my site a long time ago about the back end and the fulfillment of, as you said, answering the members and all that. It's the back end that really counts as a director. It's not being on court. So if you're going to ask me the top qualities, I'm looking for a director and how I would, if I were going to take a head pro, communication, listening, energy, because it takes a lot of energy to listen and answer correctly and answer on time.
Yeah.
And basically, finally, being organized is
I was
really
going to
number
say,
one.
Organization is, to me,
Organization.
one of the most important things.
Yeah, because it allows you to respond on time, communicate in a good manner. And just like I said, I have my business texts all there, and it really helps me stay organized and planning, planning your season or planning your year, getting that calendar for the year out 6 months ahead of time really does help. And it's all about organization.
How can you tell if someone is organized in a hiring process?
Well, if I'm okay in a hiring process, if I'm working with them as a head pro, I can see if they're there on time, 15 minutes before a lesson. Right. They've got a lesson plan for their clinics. It's pretty obvious, right? They've got the inner core of organization. In a hiring process, again, it just comes back to like member service. How fast do they respond to my text or email when I ask them a question about their resume? How fast are they to the point when I ask them to do I always ask a homework project of a pro. Like I'll say, hey, create a junior program for this club with 80 kids, and here's the demographic breakdown of the kids. How fast do they come back with organized questions, methodical questions, and do they come back on time with adhering to the deadline? If they miss a deadline, they're out right there. If you miss a deadline, if you don't call me back, if I have an email or call to you, if you don't call me back within 24 hours, A, I think you're not that hungry, and B, I don't think you're that organized, so you're probably out. So those are the things. And attention to detail. I know people say it's crazy, but if there's a misspelled word on your resume or cover letter, probably out.
I'm sure you've seen, hundreds of resumes. I've seen a lot too. I'm sure you've seen a lot more than I have. And it's incredible how, I'm sorry, but how bad sometimes resumes are made. And I think that's a huge reflection of how organized you are and how professional you are about what you're doing. So
I think our industry's behind. I've said this, behind golf and behind other industries, but the tennis, we don't have the history, and we're getting it now. I mean, we've got the PTM programs out there. We've got the McMahons of the world going out and doing a director course of study for wannabe or current directors, which I think is a great way to move this industry into a better standard of service and level of standard. So I think we're behind for sure in that regard. And I agree. The resumes I get are haphazard half the time, aren't well put together, and you can tell that we're behind. and that we need to get our pros up to par.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned golf because I was actually going to ask you about golf. Golf seems to be ahead of us in many ways. Mm-hmm. But do you think that right now, is there anything that we can immediately learn from golf as a business? Can you think of anything?
From them as a business, I think number one is sponsorship. I mean, think about sponsorships. Every time you go to a golf club tournament, there seems to be a sponsorship. They do a lot more work. There's more money in golf, so they do a lot more work in raising money for charity. So they're out in front of the community more. I think we could learn from them in terms of sponsorship and community relations, and probably in terms of guest services. Again, here we go with member service and hospitality. You show up at a golf club, and there's a gentleman there or a woman that takes your bag and says, "Hey, Mr. Shanaphy, great day to be on the course. Did you take a day off from work?" Or whatever the case may be. Our members walk in. I mean, I'm not saying mine, but in general, tennis members walk in and they kind of look up at the court number sheet and they go, "Oh, I'm on court 4." There's no hospitality. I mean, I'm hiring back after COVID a tennis concierge that is just about member services, making sure every member that walks on property is greeted. They're happy. They don't have an issue. If they do, it gets noted and raised to me or raised to the GM. So I think golf is ahead of us on that. And if you think about it, I joke about this. Two things: golf directors have bigger offices, right? And they're in their offices. They're not meant to teach. Whereas directors of tennis still, why isn't he on the court? Why isn't Jen on the court? Why isn't Ed on the court? Because I'm hiring to have better people than me on the court.
Yes. And you have 1,000 other things to do as well.
Yeah. But when you're on the court, you can't get to those things.
Right.
And for example, I mean, I know up in my club, I still am hot to trot on the roller and get those courts perfect, right? But I always joke, when do you see a director of golf rake a sand trap? When did he get out and mow a green? Never. But we're expected to do that in our industry, and that takes away from member services. Yeah, we're providing good maintenance maybe, but we can't make that call to a member if we're on a roller where the noise is, several decibels too loud to make a phone call. So I think our whole industry has to change its thought process, and that doesn't include just the pros, but how the members view us as employees or contractors.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you said all the things you said. Court maintenance wise too, like it's so important to know court maintenance as a pro and as a director, right? Because you'll be eventually in charge of those courts. But yeah, you shouldn't have to be the one having to perform the court maintenance.
At times you have to. If it rains, you want to get the people on. But day to day, you should be able to help out. But no, you can't do it all. So the buck stops with you in terms of maintenance. Unfortunately, we don't have a golf course superintendent that does tennis superintendent. Yeah. So the buck does stop with us technically, but you've got to hire and plan well enough to have that maintenance covered.
Yeah. Going back to the golf thing, I think that, in my opinion, at least, that golf is a little bit ahead of us in that they know. I feel like golf, they know who they are, and they're not trying to mold themselves to necessarily to being liked. For example, where I'm trying to go with this is that there's a certain level of etiquette you have to have in golf. You have to follow the rules. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you're out. It's very black and white. And I think in tennis, it used to be like that, and it's getting more and more relaxed. And I think that we need to stand our ground a little bit more with what is expected, what kind of behavior is expected. I mean, you see it even on the pro tour, right? Like you see these pros acting ridiculous, or you see, who was it that said the other day that they want tennis to be more like basketball, where the fans can yell and behave in a certain way. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that might bring. Maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe it would be good. Maybe it would bring more viewership and have a positive impact on the sport. But why are we trying to be something that we're not? Like, I don't know. Am I making any sense here?
I think you're addressing a bigger issue here, and that issue is golf is more connected to the tour and to professional golf. Country club golf is more connected. Okay, golf, PGA, Live now. They seem to maybe Live's not quite as stringent on the etiquette, but they seem to keep the etiquette from a club perspective the same. Whereas I always wonder why my country club players are so enthralled in watching a singles match when they never play singles. They always play doubles. You know, the elder statesmen and the older women never really play singles, and yet they're watching Federer, which is great. But does professional tennis really? I think it does filter down to tennis clubs and some different types of clubs, but on the elite side of country clubs, I'm wondering how much it really is connected. I think golf is more connected. You know, for example, this weekend I was watching the RBC, and in the playoff, you know, Fitzy's playing Spieth, and the crowd was getting pretty raucous. They had had a few drinks, I think. It was getting to be 7 o'clock in South Carolina, and they're chanting USA, USA. It's not the Ryder Cup. And Jordan Spieth told the people to quiet down. He put his hand out and said, no, this is not the appropriate place for this. Mm-hmm. I don't ever think that would happen in tennis. I just don't think, you know, maybe I'd love to think that would happen, but I don't see it happening. If Coco Gauff was out there and they started chanting USA, I don't know how she'd react. Yeah. Same for, you know, I don't know, you know, whomever you want to talk about. I don't think we have that decorum in tennis as they do still in golf. Golf may change. I would hope that we do, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not against fun. I'm a fun person. You know, I like a crowd. I like when the crowd gets into it. Like, that's really fun. That's not really what I'm talking about necessarily, but I don't know. It's just, there seems to be this is why I respect golf so much, because even when I was at the Maidstone Club, what I saw the pros do there, you know, besides teaching golf, they were teaching their students a lot more about respect, honesty for competitors, for the game, for the facility. And to me, that is really lacking in tennis. I mean, go to a junior tournament, right? It gets ridiculous.
That's where it starts.
In 2 seconds. And why are we, I just don't see that. And that is the part where I think we're behind golf. I think golf does it very well. And I think we need to step our game up a little bit more with our kids and the kind of behaviors that
I agree. I think it starts with the junior tennis, and I think it progresses into, I've seen it in men's and ladies team tennis. It's just it can be just as ugly. And I think it gets ugly on the pro tour too. You know, I don't know if we can change it, but if we are, then it's the young pros coming into this business that can change that. And I hope we can.
I think it comes from the pros. I think as a teacher, you have to just really have those conversations with your players, you know?
Right.
Really value that. But anyway, that's my TED Talk. That's my rant.
And you're right. There is a time for it. I mean, you know, just now they had down in Delray, they had the Women's USA Billie Jean Cup. That is the place to go. And that's why I said Coco Gauff, because they were chanting USA. Mm-hmm. But if it's the US Open, I don't know if we as a sport can discern the right times to have the right etiquette.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. As a sport, I don't know.
Yeah.
Golf is ahead of us there.
He's curious, right? He acts ridiculous. Such a talented player, but just watching him is so
we've always had those. You had those with Eli Nastase. You had that, you know, with Jimmy Connor too. So you've always had that, you know,
and that's
Johnny
what makes it interesting, because they're going against what tennis is known to be, I guess.
Yes.
But I think it is important that we hold on to our tennis values a little bit more, and not try to just be like, not try to be pickleball, not, you know, like, we are tennis. And I think, like, it is important to kind of keep a little bit of tradition, you know, always growing and evolving. But I think the traditions in tennis that part is so beautiful. And I think it's really important to continue down that path. Sport. Yeah. Sure. Now, going back a little bit more to the business conversations that we were having and talking about hiring, right now there's so many different search companies, and you also do hiring, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Work. Do you think that ultimately you probably do because that's what you do, but do you think that that is ultimately the best way for a club to do their hiring for, their tennis director, their manager, is to go through a consulting firm?
Not always, no. I think it depends on the club. I do think the consulting firms, as I've talked about, are basically taking over the industry job board. So you have, one KKNW is with USPTA and McMahon's with PTR, and it's more of a data driven search. They're looking for maybe people that might not be right for that job, but they keep them on file. And so you can't apply to just an open job board without having to go through a firm, which I think is a little sad. I think it's narrowing the job search in a way. What I've been doing, I've hired here at the Boulevard a lot this winter, and I've had to hire for this summer. I'm using Indeed. I'm using LinkedIn. As a firm, I'm using LinkedIn a lot. You can get to the decision makers. The board of governors are on LinkedIn. Those people are there. I don't think it's imperative that you use a firm. If it's a bigger job, probably. But if it's a smaller seasonal club, not necessarily. I think a good search committee can make, with someone who's got the volunteer time, who heads that search committee, can make a good go of it. I've seen. So we've run a whole search, many searches, and I've also just helped. I said, hey, you go run the search. We'll just advise. Give us a call. We'll advise and consent, kind of thing, like the Senate does for a Supreme Court nominee. We'll just say, yeah, that's a good idea, or no, that's not a good idea. Have you asked the candidate this?
Because they might not have that tennis background or like that tennis business background themselves. The people
right, and that is a problem. If the committee isn't well versed in hiring, and a lot of times they're not. A lot of times the committee's picked by somebody who's very vocal in the club and wants their own, candidate to win out. Sometimes, the tennis committee chair, after they've just discharged somebody, terminated someone, they've already got someone in their head that they want to bring in, and that's not always a good path to follow. So I think each club has a different set of criteria. In some clubs, those big jobs like a Chevy Chase or a Philadelphia Cricket Club or a Lawnwood up in Boston, they probably need a search firm to help them. There's a lot of politics with those big clubs. Smaller clubs, maybe not.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know that I've been through the hiring process with some of these search companies, and they do ask you a lot. It's a very thorough process. They ask you a lot of things, and they have questionnaires and like this whole thing. So it's definitely interesting. Is a very different process.
Yeah, and you have to understand that. I think number one, the search firms, the big ones, are collecting data on you as a candidate.
Yes. Absolutely.
And they do that from day one. If you go to the USPT and try to apply for a job now, you've got to jump through hula hoops to get to the job description after you've signed off your life, which I think is unfair. And I think that a lot of people are turned off by that. A lot of pros or incoming people to the industry, and they don't want to go through a search firm. On the other side, you have to understand that the big clubs, that when they do hire a search firm, the search firm is charging a lot of money. And so they've got to show the club that they're doing their due diligence and doing the work on each candidate. So I see it from both sides. I just don't want to see the job market shrink or the candidate pool shrink because of data-driven techniques, data collection techniques. And I think it is.
Yeah, I think also these companies that are involved with the associations, the PTR, the USPTA, I don't know if this is the case or not, but I would hope that they are sharing this data that they're collecting, because there is value to that data. Just looking at the data that they must have now, there's so much in there that is valuable to understanding our business, to understanding, compensation packages in different areas of the country. Like there's so much in there, right, that could be put to use. But if they're just keeping it to themselves just for their own benefit, I think that's kind of what I have a problem with. I feel like there should be one place where we get all this data, whether it's the USPTA or a third party, where we can learn from the data that they've gathered,
Well,
to benefit the industry and to benefit the pros and the clubs.
yeah, there's data out there, and it can behoove a club to find that. I mean, obviously, when you buy a house, you do comps, right?
Mhm.
And when you hire someone, you've got to do comps on that compensation package. So just recently, a couple times, we've had to hire in different places. Yeah, I'll go out and ask what general managers what they're paying their directors of tennis in the area, in the region, and it flips on the other way too. I've had a couple of committees come to me and say, "Hey Ed, your clinic rate's a little high." Well, is it? What's the ratio? What's the clinic type? I do all those comps so that when someone comes to me with either a higher compensation, employee compensation, or even a clinic compensation, got it set so that I know what I'm like up against other clubs in the area, whether that be in New Jersey, Massachusetts, or here in Florida. So you've got to be prepared, and that's part of being a good director too. Prepared, go into, advice for young pros, go into that interview knowing what the relative compensation packages are in the area. Don't let the club try to tell you what they are. You should have done your homework.
Yes. And I was talking to Max the other day about this a little bit, is that I think I really do feel that this is where perhaps the associations can help the pros more, is with this information, especially if now they're partnering with search firms that are collecting this data. Is like, hello, help us out over here, because a lot of times pros have no idea, and then we sell ourselves short because we just don't know what we could realistically expect to make in different areas of the country for different positions. A position in Florida is very different from a position in the Northeast. You can't be asking for things, right? So
yeah, and every state's taxation is different. I mean, there's just an article I sent to one of my friends in the business that I think the article said something like, if you live in New York, you've got to earn 300,000 to get a take home of 100,000. That's not the same in Texas, Florida, or Arizona. It's not that expensive a cost of living. So those all come into play whenever you look at those jobs on the job board or on LinkedIn or Indeed.
Right. And that's why we benefit from living in Florida and working in the Northeast in the summer, is because those jobs pay more because the cost of living there is higher.
Yep.
And we get to benefit from it because we don't actually live there.
Yes.
Live in Florida,
exactly.
we're there for a certain amount of time.
Right. I still don't like seeing Massachusetts tax when I'm up there, but yes, I still have to pay it.
Yeah. But you don't, but as a not as a Massachusetts resident, that would be, I'm guessing, a lot more, just like in New York,
Yeah, if you live there year round, yeah, it would be a lot more. No, you still have to pay taxes in the state you earn, but yes, you come back to a state that doesn't have any income tax, so it does help.
Right. And your rent is way lower here in Florida than it would be
it is.
there, for the rest of the year. I think, it's funny because I think this whole seasonal positions in this thing that we do, going to the Northeast in the summer, it's almost like a very well kept secret in the industry. And I think people are starting to realize it more and more, but you don't hear about it when you first come in. And
no, you don't. I mean,
it's such a gold mine.
You don't. It's a tough way of life though if you do it long term, because you're somewhere for 4 months, 5 months, and the jobs up north are changing. They're making paddle year round now. Again, that might be an employee situation, but yeah, the jobs up north are changing, and I think because of COVID, more people have moved down south, and so it's harder to get out of here in the summer. But yeah, it's still a great way to make a living. If you don't have a family. It's a wonderful way.
If you enjoy that lifestyle, I mean, it is very, very different. I happen to love it. Obviously, I've been doing this for so long, but it's not for everybody. Some people don't like to move around.
Yeah, and in the summer you're kind of camping out, so you got to camp out for a few months. But I enjoy it. I like it for one real reason. One is I get my daughter up to New England, where I grew up, New York, Connecticut, and I miss those days as a kid, and I can see her having those summers, and it's great. Yeah. But the other reason I like it is that every time I come back to Florida or go back up there, I have a renewed energy. I haven't seen these people in 6 to 8 months. I'm like, hey, And
Yeah,
it's like you just
exactly.
start right back where you were back in May, and I
Hmm.
love that. And it for me it breaks up the year, the continuity of the year. I use that word. You lack the continuity, and so therefore it's really fun to come back and meet the people again. Like it's starting all over again.
I love that too. And going up north, it's almost like going to summer camp. It's like the people that you only see during the summer,
Right.
but then you
Exactly. And
reconnect. It's so
that's what my
fun.
daughter says. And she keeps in touch with them over the summer, over the winter, and then she sees them in May, and she's like, "Hey," and she gets out of school here in May, so she gets up there in June. They're still in school. She's like, "Where is everybody?" But then they all show up.
It's so funny because that's especially on Martha's Vineyard. I literally feel like I'm in summer camp because I get around on a bike. Everybody gets around on a bike. You don't have you're like out in the woods. You don't have like the normal stores that you're used to going to. It's just
Well,
such
it's
a
fun,
such a
and you're
different.
camping out, and you're working really hard, but it doesn't seem like you're working as hard as you are because it's a new environment, and for the first few weeks, you're like, "Wow, this is great. I'm back." By the
Right.
end of the summer, though, I'm like, "Wow, that was a heck of a summer."
Yeah, exactly. You're like ready for it to be over too.
Yeah, I worked a lot. You look back
Yeah.
at the hours and the time and the questions and the emails and the decisions you had to make, and it mounts up, but you don't notice it while you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot believe that we've been talking for an hour almost.
Almost.
Yeah, I cannot believe it. So I'll ask you my last couple questions here, and then I'll let you.
Sure.
But if you could just share with us what has been the grand slam moment of your tennis life and the double bagel moment of your tennis life.
I have two. I'm going to start with the double bagel, and that's when I came back to teaching, and I'll never forget this. It was my first day. I said Jim Bucket asked me to fill in this camp at Quail Valley, where I ended up being head pro and working there almost 5 years. But the first day I'm in camp, the director there, Sam Garcia, sent me out on court 4, and he said, "Hey Ed, they're going to be practicing overheads." And I'm the new guy, and no one knows who I am, and so I'll never forget this. Marie Olvey, she hits this overhead, and she's a strong hitter. And you forget things as a pro, and then put the basket of balls in front of you, so you don't get hit in the proverbial. Anyhow, she hit me right in. I went down, out for the count for like 15 minutes on my first day. Probably my double bagel.
Oh,
I never thought I'd get the job.
oh
Double bagel. So there you go.
my God.
Yeah. So everyone can come back to me and say, "Hey, that's a great double bagel." Anyhow, thought I'd make you laugh with that one. I have two top thoughts for my career. One was just recently, Rally for Rabies, which is a big charity here run by a lovely couple that are vets in Vero, have always done this tournament. And this year I said, we don't have it up here, let's do a pro-am. And Danny Garza, who works here with me, he went out and I went out, and we brought in the French Open doubles champions, Roger and Alvaro, and they were fantastic. Jules was amazing. Marcella was amazing. We did a fundraising drive with those guys, along with Dave McNamara, who's up on West Chop on the Vineyard, who came up and won it with Stefan Laporte's son. It was a fantastic night, and for me, we raised $28,000 for inoculating kids in Malawi. Not kids, inoculating the dogs against rabies because the kids get bitten. And so we raised $28,000 for that charity. And next year we're gonna expand the pro-am. We had 16 pros. I'm really excited. And on the flip side of that, probably my greatest teaching moment was the first year I got to Sippican. I coached along with Jesse Gottlieb. We coached our 18 and under JTT team to the nationals. We went down, just opened at Lake Nona, and of course, my kids all show up in their tennis whites, head to toe, and we're playing like Northern California. We're playing in Nike, head to toe, all kinds of flamboyant colors, and we got our proverbial butts kicked. But my team, as you said, was so well behaved. I think we won 1 out of 35 matches. I mean, we were amazed to get there, and we won the sportsmanship team of the year. And for me, that was, for my team to go through such a harrowing loss and yet still keep their heads up high, for me was a highlight of my teaching career.
Oh, those are both great highlights, great Grand Slam moments. That's
Well, thank
awesome.
you.
Thanks for sharing that. And Ed, how can people find you if they want to talk to you?
Sure. Yeah, let's see. The email is Beyond the Baselines. That's with an S, beyondthebaselines@gmail.com. I'm on Instagram as well. I think it's Ed Shanaphy Consultant. You can DM me there or just call me. And this is the Google number. This is the text number, 508-538-1288. That's my business everything number. Text, voicemail, all in one.
There you
So
go.
please reach out anytime and love to talk to anybody in the business. And
your website and your podcast. You have a really good podcast.
Yeah, the website's beyondthebaselines.com, and the podcast has come back stronger this year. During last year, it was really busy in the office, so we didn't take a hiatus, but we didn't have as many. This year, we're back strong, and I'm starting a new website called the Institute of Club Directors, which is really aimed at club governing boards, because that's where I think we can help move the pros forward too through working with the governance.
Awesome, man. You're everywhere.
Trying.
No, you did such an amazing job. Thank you.
Well,
I know
thank
you're
you.
super busy, so thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh,
We really
Jennifer, thanks. It was really an honor to be here, and you're doing a great job with your podcast, and good luck back up there on the vineyard this summer.
Thank you.
In your new role, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you as you fly by me and Marion, getting up there a little later because it's a much shorter season that far out in the coast.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Vita Tennis. So, did you write down some stuff? I told you this was good. If you're not familiar with Ed's podcast called Beyond the Baselines, you may want to check that out. I'm actually in a couple episodes of his podcast. The first episode we did together is of Ed interviewing me. And then there is another episode where I interviewed my good friend, Dr. Barbara Butler, and we talked about women in sports and diversity and inclusion in sports. Hey, I would really love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the podcast so far with an email at vitatennispodcast@gmail.com. Please take a moment to rate and review the show us some support if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Lastly, you can follow Vita Tennis if you want to on social media. On Facebook, I show up as Vita Tennis, and on Instagram at Vita Tennis Podcast. See you next week.